Just a quick note about what I mean by primary and secondary psychopathy. And again, I use psychopathy as the general category for psychopaths, sociopaths, narcissists, that whole spectrum. So, I guess recently they've decided that psychopaths and sociopaths have some capacity to turn on and off their own ability to empathize on some level, but it sounds, from everything I've seen, pretty limited. But they can, if they consciously decide to try to put themselves in somebody else's shoes, they can have some rudimentary ability to do so. Prior to this, it didn't seem like they had any capacity to do that. And so what I mean by primary psychopathy is somebody who's born that way and is biologically hardwired to manifest that that phenotype. So and again, we've all got this latent in our genes. My own little pet theory about that is that the at some point in our evolutionary past we hit a bottleneck. There was probably one or a series of calamities, natural disasters, things like that, wars maybe, where the only way to survive for a large portion of the survivors was to be somebody who just didn't give a damn about what they had to do to get through their day. I mean, so there's no food, you take the other person's food, and you're not interested in wooing, you're just gonna rape. You're that whole mentality of just take whatever the hell you want. And if in a situation like that, people who are normal, functioning, empathetic human beings are probably going to die. And that's and so the survivors of a situation like that were disproportionately going to be biological primary sociopaths or psychopaths. And so but the flip side of that is that if that didn't happen, humanity would have probably ceased to exist. And this is the kind of shit that psychopaths love, is when you get to a point where you're like, well, if it wasn't for psychopaths, we would have died out. Yeah, okay, and so anyway, so we're all, the research seems to indicate that we're all encoded with this this genotype, but that doesn't mean that we'll manifest it and be phenotypical psychopaths or sociopaths. There's, epigenetics probably comes into it at some point. The nature-nurture thing is, I think, a bit of a non-starter on this issue. Now, once you get into secondary psychopathy, then that comes into play big time. But just because you had a bad childhood doesn't make you a primary psychopath. It can make you a secondary psychopath. So secondary psychopaths are people like these, like robber baron investment bankers that during economic downturns you hear about them throwing themselves off out of a building window or things like that. From what I can tell, that's never going to happen with a primary psychopath. That's something that is a trait of somebody who is biologically more towards the normal range of the spectrum, but gets but for whatever reason comes to the conclusion that his or her best bet to get either have a decent life or just not die or whatever it is, that they decide that their best bet in life is to behave as if they were primary psychopaths. And when they get to a point where they look over their shoulder and they realize that they've become monsters, then they think, well, my best bet is to take myself out because, either from guilt, shame, whatever, or because they're afraid that somebody else is going to take them out in a worse way, or something like that. But a psychopath or a sociopath is never going to come to the conclusion that they're not going to do it on purpose. Like, they may kill themselves inadvertently, drug overdoses and stuff like that, or any number of other scenarios. But they're not going to come to the conclusion that they're actually bad and that they don't want to live with the guilt, because they don't experience guilt. So no guilt, no remorse. And what I mean, another quick note, what I mean by psychopathic energy is, I'm not talking about woo-woo stuff here. I'm talking about the mindset of a psychopath. So when you subscribe to psychopathic energy or sociopathic energy, what I'm talking about when I say that is that you decide to engage with and indulge in that sort of approach. So there you go.